Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Your Intention Matters, the podcast. Thank you very much for being here. My name, of course, is still Paul Madot. Today, I have Tom Kim. He is General Manager of SYSPRO in Canada, SYSPRO Canada, I should say, in Toronto. Tom, you just came back from a big trip. Welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. I feel like I'm still on the plane floating around somewhere in the ether, but I'm happy to be here and happy to share my story and my journey, Paul.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. And so, Tom, do me a favor, say hi to everybody, provide a quick intro, and then we'll jump into your episode.
Sure. And thanks, Paul. Thanks again for having me. I'm Tom Kim. At present, I'm the General Manager for SYSPRO Canada. That means that I'm the country manager for SYSPRO here in Canada. But most importantly, I usually like to describe myself as a person that collects memories. I like to tell my kids this is the most important thing in life and not collecting things. And so I generally describe myself as a father of two amazing young girls. The biggest challenge of my lifetime, I feel like every day they throw me to the mat, and it's my challenge to get myself up off of that mat. So thanks again, Paul, for having me.
It is the most rewarding job in the world and probably the most difficult job in the world at the same time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know where they come up with all the stuff they ask me. They just throw everything at me. I feel like sales is an easy job compared to what they throw at me every day.
Well, it's funny that you say that because my wife and I, we have two kids and they're 8 and 6. And I find it fascinating to me what our kids are exposed to from a technology standpoint. Like even just this past weekend, we were on a road trip, just going somewhere, and my wife and I asked our daughter Victoria, in the classroom, do you actually have like a chalkboard? And she looked at us like, what? Like, what are you talking about? And I actually was surprised that they don't have that. She's talking about a whiteboard and a smart board, and so it's amazing what they have and what information that they're exposed to. And so I appreciate what your comment about being a parent, and thanks again for being here, Tom. The title of the podcast is called Your Intention Matters. And again, it's really built on my premise and my foundation that nothing is really given to any of us. And most of us in the world of sales never thought we'd even get into this arena. And yet here we are by the millions, all trying to figure it out. And with that said, let's jump into your journey. You ready to go?
I'm ready as ever.
All right, here we go. Listen, so Tom, we go back in time on this podcast. No DeLorean with me here, but we're going back in time here. So let's go back to early mid-90s, U of T, health and physical education and fitness. I don't see sales in there anywhere at all. And so tell me, when you were, going through your schooling, did you have a vision for something, or were you like most of us, let me get my degree and then I'll figure it out?
That's a really good question, Paul, because at the time, I really think this is one of those things that is common amongst young people, coming out of high school, having that, that guidance counselor that sits you down and says, well, Tom, you're really good at math and sciences. Do you have any other interests? Like, I feel like you should really get into something like that. And I think that's oftentimes a mistake, because when you're really young, what you really don't realize is that there's so many other things that you haven't discovered in life, and sales is one of those things. You're right. I never really imagined myself being in sales, probably like 99% of people that enter sales.
Yeah.
But what I did think, and here's a stereotype alert for you, being Canadian, is that growing up playing competitive hockey, that one day I would really like to be a professional ice hockey coach. And what I didn't know is that there are very few jobs in the marketplace for such a person, and that it's a very competitive landscape in that arena. But what I didn't know is that I had a certain mindset that really lined up well with what I would do later on in life. And what I mean by that is I just really wanted to take from every experience that I had and build myself up. And the thing that I took away from being at U of T is I learned that I need to compete for everything. And what that meant I didn't realize it at the time, but even as a young lad playing hockey, I had to compete for a spot on a hockey team. I didn't think of it that way. I just tried my best every time I went out there and tried to prove myself every time out there. And guess what? Salespeople need to do that every day of every fiscal year, and every month and every quarter. And so it prepared me well for the time that I eventually moved into sales. But more importantly, I learned about what it took to be a genuine and authentic leader. I had good coaches and I had bad coaches. I had good instructors and good teachers in my lifetime. But I actually didn't realize what a poor leader really did to me in that period of time. And so I focused on the things that were really good and I took them away.
So, Tom, post University of Toronto, did you get into sales right away as a profession, or was there a buffer in between?
So interesting that you asked that, because one of the most important things, important experiences that I took away from my university years had nothing to do with school. I took a part-time job originally to pay for, to make ends meet. And I worked in the largest retail bicycle store in Canada at the time. It was called Peddler Cycles. It was a one location place. So it was the largest single location retailer of bicycles, I think, in Canada. And it was located right here in Toronto, in the Yorkville area. It was called the Peddler Cycles. And I had my first boss there was the owner, proprietor of the store. And what I realized in my first few months is I'm not really a good mechanic. I don't know how to fix things really. I'm not that good at it. But that's okay. You can't be good at everything. And so what my boss at the time, who I consider to be a mentor today, his name's Barry Wagden. He taught me about how to be a real authentic person, because that's what I view him as. And his part and role in the company was to manage the sales staff. And he told me, hey, I want you to deal more with customers. I think people really like you, and you're not really good at fixing bikes. So I think this might be a better path. What do you think? And I said, well, I'll do anything. I'll do my best. Whatever you ask me to do, I'll do it. And I'll never forget some of the most difficult conversations I had with people who were just looking to buy based on price. And it was the first time that someone exposed me to value selling. Why do you want to buy this? Learn more about the buyer and the buying. But the key thing that really made me understand why people buy and how they go through the process is really about connecting with people. People buy from people, as they say. It's a cliche, I know. But when you make that connection, they'll always come back to you and say, I went somewhere else and I looked at this, it's a lower price, but I'd rather buy from you. Do you think we can come to a better price so that I can buy from you? I thought, wow, that's an amazing, amazing thing. And all I really was honest with you. I learned more about what you wanted and tried to position the products that we had as best as possible. And the store was a success as a result. And I eventually was promoted to be the head buyer for the company, dealt with strategic partnerships with insurance companies. I don't know if you know this, but Toronto has the highest rate of bicycle theft in North America. And so a lot of people would replace them using insurance. And so I tried to create good partnerships and foster the ones that we already had with insurance companies who would send their clients to our store to replace their stolen bikes. And so that was a very big part of our business, believe it or not. And the store saw some amazing growth and continued success over the years.
No, you know what, Tom? I had no idea about that when it came to Toronto and theft, when it came to bikes and so on. And that's an interesting path that you took, where you're kind of behind the counter, and your mentor and your coach had the foresight to see, yeah, okay, he can keep doing this, but it's not really working out. But there's something here, so get on the front lines. And so, how long was it before you moved from retail sales over to, I guess, quote unquote, corporate sales or B2B sales?
Oh, the journey continued, Paul. That's a good question. Because at one point I thought to myself, I really should use my degree. And I think a lot of people go through that process where they go to school and they find it difficult to find a role that matches what they studied. They feel like I need to prove some return on investment for all the effort and money that I put into my degree. And so I ventured out and worked in complex healthcare management. I know that's weird. Complex healthcare management. So my first professional job was to help people who are on long-term disability that suffered some problem at work and couldn't work anymore and was on disability insurance. And the insurance company would ask us to help rehabilitate the person sufficiently so that they would return back to work, and they would no longer have to pay these payments out to the insured. And so ultimately, it was a matter of organizing one's therapy, but also putting people on a path to return to work by getting them on exercise as a proxy for being in a job every day. Like it's like any exercise
Yeah.
program. You build your body and your mind up so that you can actually, return to work and feel more normal and more natural. And I use the word normal very loosely. It could mean anything, but just feeling like you could be quote unquote functional again.
And so did you take to that type of sale pretty quickly, or was it a bit of an adjustment for you?
So it was difficult because it was the first professional setting that I'd worked in. I actually had to go and buy my first suit,
Right.
and buy, several pairs of pants and shirts and things like that. Things you don't really think about when you're a kid, Paul?
That's
And
exactly.
but what I did realize, and I told you earlier, one of my life themes is take away from every experience that I had and build myself up. And the most important thing that I learned from that job is to think in an objective way. And it was the first time, I think, in my life that I thought about thinking about the world, evaluating the world in a data-driven way. So this is very, very pertinent to sales, because in the end, what it really took most to be successful in that role is selling the truth and the objective nature of what makes someone healthy and functional to that person who doubted you. The biggest thing about being on disability is the insurance companies constantly test you. And in that process, because they're trying to test whether or not you're really sick enough to be on disability.
Yeah.
And so I thought about it this way. It's the most challenging thing in the world to try and get well and get back to work when you're constantly being asked to prove that you're sick.
Yeah.
It's a complete mismatch. And so what I decided to do is not to prove to someone that they're well, but to prove to someone that they could do more than what they did yesterday. And by recording all the things that they did yesterday, I can show them in a positive way, hey, you can do this. And that probably sounds familiar. That's probably the same sort of discussion everybody has had with their sales manager, with their sales VP, and hopefully they've had that discussion, because ultimately you wouldn't want the other one that says this isn't the right job for you, which does happen.
And so, Tom, how many years did you stay in that industry?
So you would appreciate this, Paul, as being a Canadian, but in Canada we have universal health care.
Yeah.
But the definition of universal healthcare changes with the ebb and flow of changing government. And so what I did find over the next few years is that I would get a job and then I would lose my job, and I would get a job and then I would lose my job. And I felt like I started to doubt my decision to move away from my mentor at the time at the bike store, which paid me a decent wage at the time. Mm-hmm. And move into professional life, which paid me far less. But I felt like I really needed to take a step back in order to take many steps forward. And so I began to really doubt myself at that time. And what I ended up doing is made the tough decision, the really hard decision to go back to school and retool. And I had to really think hard about what my intentions and what my goals were in life. And so I went to night school and took some business courses at Ryerson. If we're still
Yeah.
playing at Ryerson, that is.
Yeah, yeah. And so Tom, how old were you at this point when you made this call?
Oh, I must have been 27 years old. So I wasn't that far out of university. It was only a few years out of university.
But still, like you're now an adult. You're technically the school years should be past us, unless you're going for an executive MBA or some doctorate or master's. And most people, are past this now. Were you a dad at this point as well?
I was not, and I
No.
was still a single guy. So I felt like this was the right time to take this risk. And it took me a while it probably took 8 months to decide to do this because I view it as the most frightening decision I'd ever made to that point in my young life, is to change careers and to rethink everything that I had done to that point.
So amazing for you for betting on yourself and realizing that there's still something here that you want to complete, and maybe it can be a catalyst as you continue to develop your career and build it. And so post Ryerson, what was next for you?
Wow. So I'll just take a step back and tell you what that one single decision did for me. And obviously, I'll never regret it. And I celebrate that one decision. And I would always recommend to anybody to, as you put it, bet on yourself and take a risk, because the outcome, the only beneficiary of that risk is you, and the
Mm.
upside is so huge. So when I returned to school, these are the things that happened to me. I actually met my future wife in night school. And she and I were both at a stage in our lives where we were looking for something new to take our lives in a different direction. So the conditions, as they say, were perfect for us to get together. And in that period of time where I should say I was studying business and accounting, and I actually thought, believe it or not, Paul, I was going to enter public accounting. And so these are the things that I learned in that period of time. Um, when I was studying for the UFE, or the board exams to become a chartered accountant, I learned that my wife is a million times smarter than I am academically, a million times. And I accept that, because I don't think I was ever really an amazing student. I did well in math and all the other things, but scored poorly in the mundane things, quote unquote mundane things other people find more natural.
Yes.
And so there was a defining moment in this process. It was 4 days before that dreaded UFE exam, and of course my wife is frustrated with me because I take so long to learn something and execute against sort of the fundamentals at times. And she said, "You know what? I'm really frustrated. I quit. I don't want to do this anymore." And in that period of time, while I was going to night school, I already found Netsuite. A former colleague of mine invited me to go there, and I was working there already. So I was working full time as as a contracts negotiator for this very little known online software company that did accounting. So it was sort of a good match,
Okay.
academic to professional. But I didn't anticipate finding a career in sales at that point at all. And this defining moment where my wife says, "I'm frustrated, I quit." And really, what she really meant was, "I'm frustrated with you, Tom. You're so slow compared to me. Pick up the pace. Let's go. Like, we need to leave this section behind and move on to the next one. Otherwise, we're not going to finish." And so ultimately, her statement really made me pause. And I said to myself, "Tom, she's right. I don't know if this is the thing for you. You're really struggling to get to the right things here and be successful here." And I said, "You're right, hon. I think I'm out. I'm gonna tap and I'm out." And she said, "Wow, I was just kidding. I was just kind of frustrated with you. And so, are you
Oh,
serious?" And I said, "I think I'm serious, because as I think about it in a more practical way, here's what I thought about. I thought, there is no public accounting job, whether I work in audit or tax or any of those, or income taxes or whatever the case may be, that will earn me the same living from a practical standpoint as working in sales. And so my first sales job was working with NetSuite hardcore in solution selling. And it taught me, or it opened my eyes to the world of, hey, there's a lot of money to be made in this sort of industry. And I had not known about it before. And I don't think that many people think of it that way.
Right.
But I do think that they should. So if I had to give my younger self advice, I would tell myself to really think about career and jobs in a different way. I would think about it with respect to what lifestyle I wanted to lead. Would I want a big family, and how would I pay for them? So I, essentially need to scratch half of all jobs off my list and half of all career tracks off my list. And that way I'll focus on the things that I really need to be in order to successfully fulfill the life goals that I
Yeah.
have.
And so, Tom, how many years? You mentioned NetSuite, and so it sounded like you were working there during your school years a little bit, and then post Ryerson, now it's your full-time gig. So, how many years were you with NetSuite overall?
Well, so I started there in 2006, and then the company was also acquired in 2017 with Oracle. So I continued working in the NetSuite practice until I want to say 2020.
Okay, so the better part of 14 years, including the Oracle transition in that period as well.
That's
So
right.
can I presume that over that stretch of time, multiple different roles over that time as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is the one thing that I really feel fortunate about, is that I joined NetSuite when I sort of described it as a very early stage, unknown or little known company that did accounting online. And so in 2006, it was a VC and PE backed entity, and it was still not a profitable business, but it was, as many people now know today, it was funded and backed by Larry Ellison of Oracle fame. And so during that time, these are the opportunities that were afforded to us. If you did well in sales, you were afforded opportunities to do and try things that you were in no way qualified to do. Were you compensated in the same way you would be if you did have that experience already? No, not really. But the company wasn't really in a position at that time to afford those experienced people to join. And in general, the company had a tough time attracting, your usual suspects of talent to the company anyway, because it was such a new concept at the time. So we wouldn't be able to get these seasoned veterans from SAP or Oracle to join us. And so what ended up happening is NetSuite became, and I say this affectionately, the largest collection of eclectic and weird individuals ever. And I say that with a lot of love, to be quite honest, because it totally worked. It was a bunch of people, as I mentioned earlier, that wanted to compete because they had something to prove. These are people that probably couldn't get jobs at SAP or Oracle or any of the big ERP companies out there. And so once they landed a job at NetSuite, all bets were off and everyone was competing, and you were on level playing field at the time.
Tom, I want to talk to you about the NetSuite Oracle relationship, so to speak. In my career, I've been a part of two different acquisitions. One where I was working for the company that was acquired, and the other instance was I was on the side where it was the company doing the acquiring. And both scenarios were vastly different when you're on one side versus the other, and so on. So I'm curious about when you were going through this. And I actually didn't know that Larry Ellison was actually a part of the VC with NetSuite and really kind of building it up. I was aware of the acquisition, but I didn't realize that there was some backstory there. And so when this was happening, any period of time when there was fear of you might be considered redundant and then you might lose your job, or like what was that transition period like when Oracle was now coming in to acquire versus NetSuite acquiring another company?
Yeah. So in 2017, when Oracle acquired NetSuite, I think it was one of the easier transitions for Oracle. I would say that. And the reason why I make that statement is that historically, NetSuite was founded and built by Oracle executives. So it wasn't just Larry behind it all, but the founder and quote unquote inventor of NetSuite's product was a longtime executive and protege of Larry Ellison. And so they founded the company on the premise that it would operate very similar to Oracle, but differently in the sense that it was one of the very few companies at the time that sold their products on a subscription. So it required a different way of thinking, a different way of selling. And so eventually the practice was founded in a very pioneering way, selling subscriptions as opposed to selling perpetual licenses. But they were all built by ex-Oracle salespeople like James Ramsey, whose father was a big time, long time, and very accomplished executive at Oracle, and was one of the very few, in my opinion, trusted sales executives by Larry Ellison. So his son, James, ran sales for a long time at NetSuite and made sure to transplant a lot of the very same elements of Oracle DNA that you'll still see today. The difference is because it was a separate entity, it did have the chance to evolve on its own, if you will. So by the time Oracle had acquired NetSuite in 2017, it was somewhat natural for the sales team to behave in a certain way and to operate in a certain way. And the same challenges that other acquired companies would have had over the years, NetSuite wouldn't have had. The other big reason for that is NetSuite was kept separate as a global business unit and was not fully integrated at the time.
Gotcha.
So was I worried about those things? Were many of the staff worried about those things? I'd say yes, but I don't know that it was objectively, Oracle never gave anybody any specific reason to feel that way. In fact, they went out of their way to say strategically Oracle and NetSuite will remain separately, mainly because their market space was different. NetSuite was really known as a small and mid-size type company, or its market was in the mid-market arena, where Oracle's focus was on the enterprise.
You know, Tom, with what I do for a living, I have the privilege of working with some really great, talented salespeople in multiple different industries across multiple different countries. I'm very fortunate for that. But I'm seeing a trend as we're recording this in April of 2022, and maybe in your role right now, you might be experiencing this as well. I'm seeing a trend of 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, maybe with a company. And then the LinkedIn profile will be an 8-year career and they've got 3 jobs over 8 years. So there's people that are maybe, listening to this podcast who can't even fathom staying for an organization for the better part of a decade and a half, like you did with NetSuite and Oracle. And I'm curious about the decision to move on after that many years. Was it yours? Was it theirs? Was it COVID? Was it like, what happened in terms of why aren't you there anymore after that length of time?
Yeah. So I would definitely say it was theirs.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that it's not normal or unexpected for a company to reorganize according to their own strategic needs. But let me just address the first part of your question, or the statement that you made about most people don't imagine being with a company longer than 2 or 3 years, let alone the better part of a decade and a half. I consider myself lucky because I think of NetSuite as 3 distinct companies almost across its history. I consider it to be a startup, so that was pretty exciting. When the company went IPO in 2007, it was a super exciting time in our lives. And if you think about where I was in my career and where I was in just sort of my life at the time, it was a good time to be at NetSuite. So it was a separate company as we matured or grew up as a company. In 2007, had to really, create processes that most companies would describe as governance and control. And so we learned about how to take what we really wanted to do and operationalize it correctly, and mitigate some of the risks that companies face ever more every year. And so that would be another part of the company. The next was this other goal that we had. And I don't know if it was a secret goal, but our goal was to become a $1 billion run rate company in the subscription era. That was a big goal, lofty goal. When they told us that this is what they wanted to do, I think we were only at maybe 400 or 500 million annually. And underlying in all of this goal, everyone knew that we were positioning the company. I don't know if everybody knew, but I knew that we were positioning the company for acquisition. And the most prominent target would have been Oracle. So that would have been around, I would say, 2014 or 2015. And so that was yet another sort of phase in the company's life cycle, if you will. And so when we finally arrived at 2017 and the acquisition happened, I actually couldn't believe that it happened when it did. Days leading up to the acquisition, in fact, we had multiple discussions about who, what, and the whole thing. And my friends and I, my colleagues and I, both came to the conclusion that it was just, sort of industry scuttlebutt. It was just rumor and conjecture, and it was designed to pump up the share prices from an Oracle and a NetSuite perspective to create buzz, if you will. And we've seen it before. And so we thought, why would they do it? They've already got a portfolio of ERP solutions and the whole bit. We actually, at the time, believe it or not, and this had nothing to do with any industry news, believed that either SAP or Salesforce were a better target for acquisition. Because SAP was struggling to make their own cloud offering compete well against NetSuite, and B, because Salesforce didn't own at the time an ERP offering, and so we felt like it was a natural fit, more of a natural fit. And so when the news broke, I think many of us were shocked that it was Oracle. And of course, there's always the whole conflict of interest thing that was, underlying it all, having, Larry Ellison be the chairman of Oracle and benefit from an acquisition of a product and a company that he had owned a majority stake in.
So, Tom, when you were at that point when they made the call in terms of the next steps for you in 2020, and I've been through that in the previous life as well, where I got a check not to come to work the next day, which was weird for me. It was the first time I'd ever experienced that. So did you take some time to process this? Did you take some time just to take some time for yourself, or was it right back on the saddle to figure out what was next for you?
Yeah, that's a good question, Paul. I was completely shocked when I was notified. Now I'll tell you about the moment that I was notified. So I just finished our fiscal year. It was just the beginning of June, and I was riding high. I have to admit, I was probably one of either one or two teams that had made their number during the first year of COVID, and we had made some amazing quick turnarounds and shifted our focus in order to do that. And I was really proud of our team and all the effort and time that went into executing against a very big change in our direction in order to make our number. And so I honestly thought our head of sales, our group vice president, was calling to congratulate me. And my more immediate boss at the time told me that he was positioning me for promotion. And life was great, Paul. It was great.
Yeah.
And then I received a completely different call, and I honestly thought it was a sick joke. And so for the first time in my life, Paul, as you and your listeners have all recognized in the first little bit of this podcast, I'm usually not left with few words. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what to say, Paul. I was speechless. And so it was one of these, earlier on, I told you I made the decision to shift careers and to change careers completely in many respects. this one was sort of handed to me. And so I didn't know what to do at first, to be quite honest. And so you're right, not because I made the purposeful decision to take some time. I was forced to take that time. But you know what, Paul? I was really glad I took that time. For the first time in my life, like I say, I was paid handsomely this time. I should use the word handsomely. I felt like David Justice. You know, the Yankees paid me to play
That's
against them, you know, that
that's
kind of
right.
idea.
Moneyball. Exactly.
Exactly. And so I took some time, and it was forced time, but I took the time and I made the most of it. And I thought about whether or not I was happy. Was I just shocked that I just lost my paycheck? Or was I really just, you know, just worried about change and worried about the finances and all the other things that are real, there's no doubt. Um, but the best thing that happened at that moment in time is my wife told me, I'm not worried at all.
Mm.
And she said something to me that changed the way I thought about doing the next steps, which was what you really need to think about is, were you really happy? Right? Think about all the things that we had sacrificed over the years, and would you do it again? Is that what you would ask yourself to do again? And I thought, I don't even know how to answer that question. It was just, it was
Yeah.
just a weird sort of thing. I was just going along, making a great check, taking our vacations, but reality check. Was I really happy doing the things, working 8, 10, sometimes 15-hour days, stressed out at month end, stressed out at quarter end and year end, unable to do a bunch of things that, that when you look back, you really can't get back. You can't get that time and experience back. And this is what I mean. So my wife reminded me, these are the things that we missed over the past 15 years.
Yeah.
You would miss, we never got to holiday at month end or quarter end. So you basically restricted our holidays to a specific period of time. So we missed a lot of things that my family did that we couldn't participate in. So that's number one. Number two is we were on calendar fiscal year end. That meant that
Yeah.
January was as busy as December being in sales leadership.
Totally.
And so what would happen in January? Well, we roll out the new fiscal year, and so there's no break from year end. You got to get everybody motivated and on the same track for the upcoming year, and come out of the gates really strong and not have that hangover from the previous fiscal and things like that. So I missed my birthday celebration because my birthday's in January. I missed my anniversary because my anniversary is in January. And so for 15 years, we would celebrate all those things in either February and early March. And my wife reminded me that, she wasn't cool about that. But she put up with me, sort of thing. So, yep, go ahead.
I was going to say, with what you're saying rings true for me because, when you're in the moment, it's all it just becomes so routine that this is just how it is. And I remember when I met my wife, she is a nurse, and so she's the furthest thing removed from like a sales game whatsoever, right? So she didn't, I didn't understand her world at first, she didn't understand my world at first. And I remember telling her that prior to me doing what I'm doing today, I was like you, Tom, in that my world at Xerox was very monthly, quarterly, yearly driven, and we were calendarized as well. So December 31st like was a busy day because we're trying to install gear that day for year end numbers. Like there was no check out at 9 a.m. on the 31st or whatever. It was like a full day. And now with what I'm doing for a living in the training world, nobody really wants training in December, even for the companies that are not, fiscally Q4 in December. It's holiday time. People are kind of eggnog and closing out the year. So nobody really wants training. So for the last 2 to 3 weeks of December, for me, it's almost a month off because I'm busy planning for Q1 for stuff, but my 2 kids' birthdays are in December, the 24th and the 29th. So now I get to celebrate their birthdays. I'm there on their days. I'm not working. It's just, it is what it is. And so I so respect what you've said, where you took the punch to the gut. And I laughed when you said that because I was blindsided when that happened to me as well. I walked into the boardroom. My boss called me, and this is 20 years ago now. My boss called me in and said, "Hey, Paul, can we meet in the boardroom?" I go, "Great." I walk in, HR circle. "Hey, Judy, how are you?" Like, not even thinking anything is going on whatsoever. And then I get the letter, like, "Oh, okay." So it's so cool that you took, kind of the punch to the gut, and then you realize, no, there's some positives that can come out of this. You're going to be fine. You got a strong resume. Now you'll figure out what's next. That's so cool that you did that.
Yeah, and it was hard, Paul. I have to admit, because like you say, it's not often that you get a chance to actually step back, and I honestly didn't even know how to think about it, because you're right. We're just in the moment, and that's what makes salespeople really good. Be in the moment, be present, and be attentive. It's, the cliche is very true. It is kind of like golf, the walk of life, playing golf. If you don't focus on the shot that's in front of you, eventually your round will deteriorate and you just won't score.
Yeah.
But if you focus on what's in front of you and you execute well, and then move on to the next thing, it will build in your roster of successes, and amount to something. When the fiscal year is all done. And so, being able to take a step back was an opportunity, yes, but it was probably one of the tougher things I've had to do in my life. But what it made me realize is this: um, I didn't want to work in a large company culture anymore. When I say large, I thought Netsuite was a big company. It had, about 5,000 people. When I learned that that's not a big company, and Oracle acquired us with 170,000 employees, 60% of which are from acquired companies. So most people, it seems, don't choose to join Oracle, which is
Right.
another reason where I said to myself, it's not that big a deal. In reality, I didn't choose to join Oracle, so it's not like they rejected me in some ways.
Understood. Understood. So during this time of transition, did you find SYSPRO or did they come calling?
They came calling, although I was looking at, for the better part of a year, my full-time job was finding my next job. And so I did what I do every day, which is come down to my home office and prospect, and have networking calls, and reach out to my network. I was very good to my network over the years, and my wife reminded me that it's your turn now, and it's not a handout. You did a lot for people over the years. It's your turn to go and seek out something in return, which is what I did. But ironically, I didn't know anybody at SYSPRO. They reached out to me through a executive recruiting firm. And the reason why I chose SYSPRO is that it's a privately backed company. So you might say, wow, that's a big difference, isn't it? And it is.
Yeah.
It was, and it is, and it will be. And SYSPRO is a growing company still, but it has different motivations. So when I think about companies that say we're customer centric, there are a few companies that can actually prove that that's true through their actions. SYSPRO proves that through their actions and their customer base. I think 70% of their customers have actually been with them as customers for greater than 10 years. That's a big deal. I don't know of many software companies that can say the same thing. But they make decisions not based on their responsibility to Wall Street, which is refreshing. And they'll even say, it's not our motivation to build value in the company or its shareholders. We're here for our customers. We're here for our employees. And it's almost like a weird place to be at, Paul, because usually it's the other way around. That's usually just a marketing tagline in many respects, but SYSPRO really lives that every day. Are they ultimately, the best organized and all these other things right now to invite themselves into the transformation that they want? No, but no company ever is. And the really nice thing about it is everyone's really honest about that. We try to do our best to put our heads together and make the right moves at the right time. And so that's ultimately very refreshing for me. I also didn't want to have a tyrant as a boss, as many of us has experienced, like being yelled at.
Yeah.
I don't know how many times I was yelled at over the 15-year period, or how many times I received an angry phone call from our CEO, which I love and respect, by the way. That's Zach Nelson. Shout out to Zach Nelson, who was a cloud pioneer at the time. Have a lot of respect for him, but there were moments where I was just really scared, and of course, it all comes from a good place. Everybody
Yeah, I
cares,
get it.
everybody wants to succeed, but it's how we actually behave with each other that really defines us in the end. And taking the extra moment, and taking the extra time, and I just felt like this broadly, high level. I'm just way too old to yell at. So ultimately, I liked what I heard from our CEO North America, Brian Rainbaugh, who's a terrific mentor and growing into a great friend. I have really high hopes for SYSPRO because they have something. They have a great product. It's funny. I just always think people don't know what they have until it's gone. Most often, it's cliche, but it's true.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think we feel like we're the small kids on the block and that we're not good enough sometimes. But heck, if they only knew how good their product was in comparison to what we were doing at Netsuite, it's amazing.
Tom, what a great story. I so appreciate it. I'm going to try and summarize this. I mean, we go back to U of T, health and wellness and fitness, and then you find yourself in retail at a bike shop in Yorkville, a prominent bike shop. You're behind the scenes. It's not really for you. You get maybe pushed out into the front lines, and you kind of go, okay, I like this. That's for your first exposure to value selling, and not just on price. And then you get into healthcare on some level, and you're kind of doing that. And then you bet on yourself. You go back to school. At not an old age, but still 27, you're trying to get your career. You got expenses it's expensive to live in Toronto, et cetera. And you go back to school, you bet on yourself, and then you find NetSuite, and including the Oracle acquisition, 15 years or so with the company, multiple different roles, which tells me that multiple roles means multiple successes, because you don't get promoted into different jobs unless you've earned it in the previous position. Then you find yourself in a spot where, for the first time, you're asked to not come back to work. You're not prepared for it. How do I manage this? Is it personal? Is it not? How do I do this? And you took some time, and you took, maybe the perceived negative in the moment, converted it into a positive. You took some time for yourself, which I'm sure wasn't easy. And then you made the decision, I don't want to get back into another 100,000 plus organization, global presence, and so on. I want to be a little bit more nimble. And then SYSPRO finds you, and it sounds like life after Oracle has been serving you well.
Yeah, that's a good summary, Paul. Let's not forget, when I did make the decision to go back to school, I left this out, but I also had to make the gut punch decision to move back in with my parents for a short period of time. I left that out, but now it just makes the story that much more colorful, because I think my parents actually liked having me back at home. I was the buffer again. And it was just kind of a funny blip in my life, I think. Yeah.
So we got a big shout out to Mr. and Mrs. Kim out there then.
Indeed.
Stepping up.
Thank you for helping me pay my car payments at the time, and be supportive for sure. Without that moment in time, boy, I don't know where I'd be.
I think so many of us can appreciate that. I certainly was in that spot as well in my late 20s as well. And so, Tom, really great having you on. Thanks so much for sharing your story, and thanks so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, Paul. I had a lot of fun. Thank you.
You bet. All right, everybody, we're going to wrap it up right now. Remember, your intention matters. Why? Because that's the result you'll tend to get. We're out of here. We'll do it again next week. And let's go Leafs.